I heard something. A shadow of someone walking appeared right outside my classroom window. Immediately, a bad feeling washed over me. Could this be the reason for the lockdown? After moments thought, I remembered something else. One of my windows was actually open. I had opened it a little because the weather was so nice. I had to run over there and close it, but the man outside was moving in the same direction. It was obvious that I wasn't going to get there in time.
This happened back when I was in 10th grade. I went to a high school that I would describe as pretty average for the most part. Nothing that interesting or exciting happened on a daily basis back then. I would ride the bus to and from school every day from my house, which was about 10 minutes away one day in the spring. I was in my third period class. It was a writing class. And I always found it really boring. This day, in particular, was like many others towards the end of class with maybe 20 minutes left. I got up and asked to go to the bathroom. My teacher said yes. And I left the classroom. I walked down the empty hallway to the bathrooms. They weren't that far away, just at the end of the hall, and around a corner as I was inside using the bathroom. I heard the door open. Nobody walked in though. Instead, I heard them say, "Is anybody in here?" When I heard this, I was confused. It was a bathroom with multiple stalls, so why would they ask that? I did not answer, and after like 2 or 3 seconds, the door shut. Whoever it was had left it. Seemed like it was probably a teacher. I finished up, and as I was at the sink washing my hands, I heard the school intercom beep. Then there was an announcement that the school own was now in a lockdown. I remember they said that this was not a drill. I felt a little bit nervous when hearing that. Maybe that's why someone had asked if anybody was in the bathroom. I wasn't quite sure what to do. Was I supposed to stay in the bathroom or go back to the classroom that I had been in? I figured that it would be best to go back to the classroom. My teacher was probably wondering where I left the bathroom, but I didn't want any teachers to see me, or I was afraid that I would get in trouble when I got into the hallway. I saw that it was completely empty. Still, things were also very silent. I walked down the hallway to go around the corner and back to the hall that my classroom was in, however. I heard footsteps as I got near. I wasn't sure who it was, probably a teacher. I decided to move back and hope that they wouldn't see me, but the footsteps continued to get closer. I then walked back down the hallway and quickly turned the first corner to another hallway. When this happened, I heard the footsteps speed up. I was 100% sure now that they were following me. They didn't say anything though. I started moving even faster and the footsteps got faster as well. Then I started to realize that maybe this wasn't a teacher. Maybe this was somebody who wasn't supposed to be in the building. I turned another corner and was looking around for anywhere to go to get away. I happened to see a door that was opened a little bit. I quickly got inside as the footsteps approached from around another corner. I shut the door and at first, I couldn't see anything. The lights were off, but it looked like I was in some kind of closet. There was a bunch of stuff in there, like extra desks and boxes. I couldn't see well at all, but I could make out those things. I was completely silent, even holding my breath. I could still hear the footsteps, and they continued to get closer and closer. Eventually, they reached right outside of where I was, but they just walked past. I felt so much better when I heard that I could hear them walking farther away down the hall at the same fast pace. The footsteps got quieter and quieter as they moved away. It then got very silent. I was feeling better and feeling like Hoover. That was now gone, and it would be safe to leave, just to be sure though. I was waiting a little bit longer then, out of nowhere, I heard a noise, but it was coming from behind me inside the room that I was in. I turned around just in time to see a man in there coming around one of the boxes. I couldn't see any details of who it was because of how dark it was in there. Just that it was a man. I ran for the door as fast as I possibly could. Luckily, I was only a few feet away. I opened it and ran out into the hallway. I didn't look back and sprinted in the direction down, the hallway that the footsteps had walked with in a minute. I saw a man walking. He turned around looking confused. It was one of our teachers. I recognized him. I told him that there was a man hiding in the closet. We both went towards the front of the school. Where the main offices were, we were let into a room, and I found out that the police had just arrived within 20 minutes. They had found the man, who had moved and was now hiding in a bathroom. He was in fact not supposed to be in the school. There was the whole reason that we had been under a lock down the footsteps that I'd heard were just a teacher. I can't believe that I hid in the same room as that guy looking back. I definitely should have just walked straight back to my classroom. My name is Mia, and this happened when I was in high school. It was my junior year, and I just recently gotten my driver's license. I passed my driving test in the middle of the semester, and I had a car from my parents that I could drive to park in the main school parking lot. You had to have a parking pass, and you had to buy them ahead of time. So I couldn't do that instead. I had to park in the lower lot, which was a little bit farther of a walk to the school. After you parked, you had to walk down a path and went by the baseball fields on one side and woods on the other. Then, you would pass the football field and get to one of the main parking lots. I didn't mind this because I was just happy not to be riding the bus anymore, and I could drive myself. I remember that at this point in the school year, I would get to school when the sun was just starting to rise. On about the second day that I had parked in lower lot, I was walking up to school and I saw this guy in the woods standing like 3 or 4 feet in at first. I thought maybe it was another student. It was still kind of dark out, and I couldn't see really well. When I got closer though, I saw how it definitely was not a student. And this seemed to be a grown man, much older than high school age. He kind of looked over when I passed, and I looked away when I got closer to avoid a weird interaction. I walked to school and didn't think too much of it, but after school that day, I walked back to my car and saw the guy in the woods again. I had forgotten about him, but when I saw him again, I remembered it was really strange to me. Why was he in the woods? And who was he? I left school and drove home for a few days. Everything was normal, and I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I didn't see the guy at all. But then on another morning, I was walking up the path and heard footsteps behind me. I didn't remember another student parking near me. When I got out, so I looked back, I saw a grown man walking about 50 feet back looking down at the ground. I couldn't tell for sure if it was the same man who had been standing in the woods. Before, I didn't get a good look at him either time. But this was most likely the case. Who else could it be? I looked back to where I was going, and I kept walking to my school after that. I didn't see the man for the rest of the day. The very next day, I saw him again. It was when I was leaving the school this time. By now, I was beginning to wonder why this man was hanging out around the school. All the time, I knew he didn't work at the school. And it was really suspicious this time. I saw him as I was almost down at the parking lot, standing there on the other side of the path. Not by the woods this time. I passed him by and ignored him like I always did. But this time, when I entered the parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. When I got to my car, I saw the man entering the parking lot, walking towards my car. It was still a good distance away, but it seemed as though he might approach me, so I quickly drove off the next day. It was the last time that I saw the man. I arrived at school when I usually did. I parked my car, got out and started walking up the trail to school at first. I didn't see the guy, but as I kept walking, I heard the footsteps behind me. I looked over and saw him once more. I walked faster, and when I got to the school parking lot, the guy was still behind me. I sped up even more, and finally I got to the doors, and I entered the school once. I got inside, I felt safe. Went to my first class of the day. About halfway through the class period through the school went into a lockdown at first. None of us knew what it was for. I didn't suspect the guy at all. The lockdown lasted for a good 30 minutes. Or so when it was over and we found out the cause. I couldn't believe it. All I was told was that a man had been found hiding in one of the women's restrooms inside the school. It was the bathroom that was located right by my locker. I knew it was probably the same man, and after that I never saw the guy again. I'm a high school teacher. I teach math, and my classroom is on the first floor of the school. I've always had the classroom decorated with posters and other fun things to make it more interesting for the students. I love teaching and helping kids learn math, which can be a difficult subject for many. The time of the story was last year during the 5th period of the day. I did not teach a class during that period and was using it to grade assignments, which sometimes took quite a while. It was a warm and sunny day, and about 15 minutes into that period, I found out that the school was being locked down. I did what we were instructed to do, which was to lock the doors of our classroom and turn the lights out. I already had the blinds closed in my classroom because the sun had been shining in and getting in my eyes, wondering why exactly we were under a lockdown, and I hadn't been given a reason still. I hoped that everybody was okay. Things were very quiet. I didn't hear or see anything unusual for a good 10 minutes. I was sitting at my desk in the corner of the room. Then I heard something there. Appeared to be a shadow of somebody walking right outside my classroom window. I had a set of windows that ran all the way along the backside of my classroom. It led to a part of the side of the school. Immediately outside of it was a grassy area with a few trees and a long line of bushes. I'd never seen anybody walking right alongside the building like that. There was a sidewalk that was much farther away still. I could only see their shadow and not actually who it was, but it appeared as though it was a man right away. I had a bad feeling. Could this be why we were under a lockdown? Just after thinking that, I remembered something else. One of my windows was actually open. It was such a nice day that I had opened the window a little bit after the last class period had ended. It was on the opposite corner of the room from where should I risk it and get up from my desk? I would have to run all the way over there and then close the window. The man outside was also moving in that direction. It was clear that I wouldn't make it there before the person did, and I hoped that they would just walk past. But when they reached the window, I heard it start to raise. I saw a man's arm, and then I ducked down. I hid underneath my desk, where you would normally put your feet. Luckily, there was a wall blocking me from the other side, so the guy wouldn't be able to see me unless he came over here. But had he heard me? I wasn't sure. I tried to be as quiet as I could. I heard the man enter the classroom and stayed by the window for a few minutes. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to contact somebody, but I didn't want to make any noise. I was listening very closely to see if the man would move at all. He seemed like he was staying in the back, opposite corner of the classroom. This went on for several minutes. I barely moved at all occasionally. I would hear slight movements from the man, but he never changed locations. I was pretty close to my classroom door, and I got the idea to leave at first. It seemed like a crazy idea to me, but as time went on, I really wanted to leave the classroom. I decided that I was just going to go for it before I could, though. I heard the sound of the man moving. He was getting up and walking closer to me. My heart sank. I felt like I had missed my opportunity to leave. I should have got up and ran for the door sooner. I just hoped that the man did not know that I was in here with him, and also that he wouldn't look behind my desk. His footsteps got closer instead of walking over to where I was, though he walked over to where the door of my classroom was. He remained there for a minute or so. Then I heard the door being unlocked, and it opened. The man had actually left the door closed behind him, and I waited for a few seconds before getting up and running back over to the door to lock it. Then I called into the principal to let him know what had happened. I remained in my classroom, and about 10 minutes later got a phone call and was told that everything was now fine. the lockdown was lifted. And thankfully they had located the man. He had been seen suspiciously walking around campus, which is what caused the lockdown. I can't believe that he got in through my window. I'm sure to keep my windows closed now. This story took place about 5 years ago. It was my senior year of high school, and I was working on a big test. It was for a science class, which was tough for me, but I studied hard for it. I remember that I finished the test much later than everybody else. I had completely lost track of time because I was so focused by the time. I realized I was taking so long, the bell rang, was tempted to hurry and finish, but I decided to keep taking my time. And doing my best, I knew that it wouldn't be a big deal, and I would not get in trouble for being late to my next class. I finished the test and my teacher gave me a pass to get to the next class of the day. When I left the class, the hallways were completely quiet and empty. It felt kind of weird. I walked the hallways to get to my next class, but only about a minute later, as I was still in the hallways, I suddenly heard an announcement that the school was being locked down. I started walking faster so that I could get to my class. I had no idea why there was a lockdown, but I knew that I didn't want to be in the hallways turned a corner to another hallway. I suddenly saw a man standing in the middle of it, but I wasn't a teacher or employee of the school. I could just tell this man had long, messy hair and was wearing clothes that appeared old and kind of dirty. I knew immediately that I needed to avoid him, but I would have to walk past him to get to my class. I was standing right in the middle of the hallway in plain sight of the guy, but he wasn't looking over at me. He was facing in another direction. I turned around and ran back, hoping to get out of his sight before the guy would look over. I hid around the corner and I waited. I didn't hear the man walking closer to me, which was good, but I didn't hear him walking at all. Suddenly, the man spoke. He yelled out and said, "Hey, I know you're right around the corner." When I heard him say this, I panicked. I really didn't think that he had seen me. After he said this, it sounded like he was starting to walk closer. I took off running in the opposite direction right away. I ran as fast as I possibly could. As soon as I started running, I heard the guy running after me. I wasn't really that fast, and I was afraid that the man would be able to catch up to me. I looked around for anybody else in the hallways at all, but saw no one. I kept running. I turned corners from one hallway to the next. Nobody else was there, though the man seemed to be gaining on me, even though I was going my fastest. I decided to try and get out of the school again, and I ran for the west entrance of the school, which I was closest to. Then, finally, I saw a police officer by the door. When I got there, when he saw the guy chasing after me, I saw him start to run over the man behind me, stopped chasing, and ran in another direction and was now being chased by the police. I stayed by the door, and the man was caught several minutes later. The lockdown ended shortly after that. I really don't know who the guy was or what he was doing inside the school. I didn't hear that much more about it. Afterwards, that was the scariest moment of my life, though. This story happened when I had to go to Saturday school. I guess that Saturday school was sort of like detention. I was in high school, and I think that I was a junior. The way I got detention was that I forgot to return several of my school books. We were given books from the library that we needed for certain classes. When the semester was almost over, we were supposed to return the books on our own. However, I forgot and actually lost one of the books in my house eventually. I found it and I returned all of my overdue books, but I still had to go to Saturday school. It really wasn't that bad, and pretty much just like study hall. It was just one classroom, which was one of the language arts classrooms. The teacher just sat at his desk and made sure that we all behaved occasionally. He let us know what time it was and could answer some questions or help us with problems if he could. I remember that the teacher was Mr. Sanders. He was a nice guy and overall pretty reasonable. I remember that my mom dropped me off at the school just before 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. Saturday school started at 8 and went until 12. But not everyone had to be there the whole time. I only had to be there for 2 hours, so I would get to leave by 10. I know that depending on what some of the kids did to get Saturday school, they might have to write papers. Or something like that. Other kids just had to work on their own individual homework, or just study. I had to write a short paper on what I learned from not returning my books on time. I also brought a little bit of homework to do for another class. Got there was only 4 other students. I recognized 2 of them, and the other 2... I didn't, and they were not in my grade. The ones I recognized were both pretty much troublemakers kids, who would skip class a lot or not turn stuff in. I felt sort of out of place, because I was normally a really good student at 8 a.m. Mr. Sanders shut the door and spoke to us for a few moments, then went behind his desk on his computer. I got to work and wrote the paper. It didn't take that long at all then. I started doing my homework. I finished that too by the time it was 9:30 a.m., and I got a book from Mr. Sanders' bookshelf in the back and started reading. I remember that it was a short time after I started reading that Mr. Sanders got up from his desk and said that he was going to the bathroom. He jokingly asked us all if we were going to be okay while he was gone. Then he left like a minute later. One of the other kids that was in the classroom got up and left as well. I wasn't quite sure what he was doing, but I didn't think too much of it. I just kept reading, but like 5 minutes later, the school of intercom said that we were going under a lockdown. This seemed really strange. We all had no idea why we would be in a lockdown. There was hardly anybody at the school. It was a Saturday. Only one of the doors was even unlocked for people to come in on Saturdays. Most of us knew from lockdown drills that the classroom doors were supposed to be closed, locked, and the lights turned off. Then we were supposed to sit on the ground in the back of the classroom. The problem was that our teacher was gone. We looked around at each other, unsure of what to do. Then someone spoke up and said, "Shall we close the door?" We decided that we would. I walked over and closed it, then locked the door. Someone else turned out the lights. We all started talking to each other, wondering what exactly was going on. If our teacher came back, we would let him in. But he most likely had keys with him. We weren't hearing anything from the hallways, but whatever the problem was could have been from anywhere in the school. Few minutes went by, and nothing happened. Then somebody tried opening the door, thinking it might be the teacher. I got up and walked over to it. But by the time I got there and looked out, nobody was there. I went back and sat down at my desk again. We were really confused in the classroom now, less than a minute later. It sounded like we heard some shouting in the distance. Then someone tried opening our classroom door, and that was followed by more knocking on it. I walked over once again, and this time looked out the small window. It was the kid who had been in our class earlier, but left. He was yelling and asking to be let in. Every year, our school is required to perform at least 2 lockdown drills. However, our principal at the time would always have us do more, like 3 or 4, so I was pretty used to it. All the teachers would always warn us ahead of time to save any panic. That morning, as I walked into my first period class, I was informed by my history teacher that the school would be having a lockdown drill that day. I actually kinda liked them because it meant we'd have less work to do, considering the 20 or 25 minutes they always take. 30 minutes into class, a short buzzer went off, followed by our principal's voice on the intercom. Like every other drill, he explained how the school was going into lockdown, but that it was just a practice drill. He explained that should there ever be a real lockdown, the buzzer would sound for longer, and there would be no intercom announcement. Our teacher instructed all of us to shut the curtains and go into the corner of the classroom that was not visible from the outside door. We then shut off the lights and locked the door. For the next few minutes, we sat in silence. Eventually, we heard footsteps outside. It was the principal trying every classroom door to make sure they were locked and that the classes were responding to the lockdown correctly. Before I knew it, the drill was over. The day progressed, and I was now sitting in my physics class, which was right after lunch. At some point, I ducked out of the class to use the bathroom. Our school building had a basement, and down there, they had a bathroom that was much more private and a lot less busy, so I always tried to use that one. There were a couple of classrooms down there, so it didn't look weird for me to go down. I was sitting in one of the back stalls, and I was the only one in there, which was usually the case. All of a sudden, I heard the lockdown buzzer start going off from outside in the hall. It sounded for about a full minute before it abruptly stopped. I waited for the principal's voice to come over the speakers, but it never did, which, as I mentioned earlier, was supposed to signify a real lockdown. At first, I didn't really think it was a real lockdown. It happened too close to the practice lockdown earlier that morning. I thought it was just a second part of the drill. But as I sat there for a few more minutes, I started to realize that if that were the case, it probably would have been explained over the intercom. I started to panic now, thinking this was real. I wasn't safe in the bathroom. The door had no lock. So I ran outside to try and find a classroom. There weren't many options in that basement, and it was also hard to see now that they turned the hall lights off. I did eventually find a classroom door. I tried the handle, and it was locked. I looked in through the glass part of the door, and in one of the corners, I could barely make out a kid hiding. There was a class inside. I banged on the door, explaining that I was a student and trying to hide. I got no response. I was both terrified and frustrated. I realized the protocol was to never let anyone inside, no matter what. I was on my own. I thought about going back to the bathroom, but found an empty computer lab first and settled on that. I got under one of the back desks, and for the second time that day, sat in silence. Only this time for a real lockdown. 10 minutes went by. Nothing, not even an update over the intercom. Then, a heart-dropping sound of running footsteps from outside, coming down the basement stairs. The person's heavy breathing kept getting closer. It now sounded like it was just outside the room. I started adjusting my body position to try and duck down more to get further out of view when a light turned on. It was the light to the computer on the desk above me, waking up. I must have accidentally pulled the mouse cord. It wasn't that bright, but it was enough for me to make out a silhouette in the doorway to the room. I genuinely feared for my life in that moment. The person was just standing there. I prayed they wouldn't enter the room, and after what felt like an eternity, they turned and continued running down the hallway. A few minutes later, and the lockdown was over. The school tried to keep the incident silent, but it eventually got out. Apparently, a kid in my grade that I actually slightly knew stole his dad's gun and got into the school through a back door he left propped open earlier in the day. Police showed up to the school and detained him before any bullets were shot. They later searched his backpack and found a paper with a list of names on it, which they believe was who he meant to kill that day. Pictures of the list itself leaked. My name was number 4 on that list. I never heard of the kid, just got scared, and decided not to do anything, or if he just genuinely didn't find anybody after entering the building. Either way, I believe the person that I saw while hiding in the computer lab was him, and that I could have lost my life in that moment. Back in October of 2016, for whatever reason, these killer clown sightings kept getting reported around America. Real or fake videos of them would almost always get posted somewhere online. For that whole month, it was all over the news. I remember in our town specifically, it kinda got out of hand. People in the area were committing real crimes wearing clown masks, or sometimes full-body clown outfits. It was honestly terrifying. Anyway, back when this was happening, I was in high school. Throughout that whole month, many of the staff and student school emails received threats. They were always from a different random email address, so there was no real way of blocking them. It was always something like killerclown@cvx.zy or something random. It usually had something to the effect of killer clown followed by some random characters. It got so bad that the school had to send out a mass email to all students and parents, saying they were aware of the threats and were taking them seriously. I remember Sundays. The teachers were instructed to teach with their classroom doors locked. They weren't even allowed to leave to go to the bathroom. Needless to say, a lot of us were on edge. I have no shame in saying it was really scary. I saw some of the things the emails were saying. A lot of it was really graphic and truly disturbing. Of course, at the time, none of us knew if anyone was really planning to act on these threats, or if it was just someone somewhere behind a computer screen playing a sick joke. But honestly, it felt like only a matter of time before something would go down. And finally, one day, something would. I was in my trigonometry class when the school's lockdown alarm went off. The principal's voice then came over the loudspeaker. His voice was shaky. Now, our principal was a pretty intimidating dude, so hearing fear in his voice only furthered my own fear. I knew this lockdown had to be related to the threats. In that classroom, there wasn't really a good corner for all of us to hide in. You could see a good portion of the room from outside the door. So our teacher ordered us to barricade the door with all the desks and chairs in the room. He then sat as far away from the door as we could, although even this provided a clear view of the glass window on the door. I watched as all the lights abruptly turned off in the hallway, shortly followed by the lights in the classroom. The familiar hum of the heating system faded. The school had cut the power. It was eerie. The whole building was quiet, and there wasn't the usual whispering or joking around from other students like there was during practice drills for this kind of thing. Even our teacher had a look of fear on his face, putting me more on edge. We sat there for multiple minutes. We then heard a metal banging sound, like someone was hitting the lockers down the hall. I overheard the girl sitting next to me quietly begin crying. The noises continued off and on for the next few minutes. As time passed, the noises kept getting louder, as whoever was making them seemingly kept getting closer. At this point, my classmates and I were staring at each other, all of us gauging each other's reactions and the sound of the classroom's door handle rattling. I looked up through the glass on the door. I saw a clown mask looking in. It stood there for a while, not doing anything, and then roughly ducked down out of view, and the sound of the door handle rattling continued. They were trying to pick the lock. We all sat there listening to this happen when the lock disengaged. Immediately, the full body force of this person smashed into the door. The desks barricading the door slightly shifted back. This happened a few more times, but not much progress was made. They eventually gave up, and we could hear their footsteps running away down the hall. When police arrived, they cleared the building and escorted all of us out. No one was ever found responsible for the lockdown. It's believed that at least 3 people, dressing in clown costumes, entered the back entrance of the school that day, intent on making true to the threats sent over email. At the time, the school did have some cameras, but during the lockdown they cut the power, so they never caught anything. School was canceled for the next few days. When we came back, the school had installed a new auto-locking feature on the doors and windows. This happened in 2013. I graduated college the year prior with a degree in education. I wanted to be a teacher and was able to land a job at a nearby high school. The first few weeks I was shadowing another teacher, as they called it. It was meant to help me prepare to teach my own class, but it really just felt like a glorified TA position. I would sit in the class with the other students and help the teacher when needed. It was a chemistry class, and on one of the lab days, we required those flasks used for chemical reactions, measuring solutions, and stuff like that. All that type of stuff was kept in a supply closet on the other side of the building. I made my way out of the class and started heading over there. After 2 minutes, I was there and began looking for the flasks. All of a sudden, my phone went off. It was an automatic text message from the school. Being a part of the staff, we were required to sign up to receive these automated messages. The text explained how the school was going into lockdown and that it was not a drill. By the time I would have made it back to my class, the door would have likely already been locked, so I opted to hide in the closet by myself. I turned off the light and closed the door. There wasn't much room to sit down, so I had to just stand there in the dark. After a few seconds, The lockdown alarm sounded from the speakers throughout the building. The usual ambience from inside nearby classrooms immediately died down. It was now completely quiet. Breaking the silence was the sound of my phone going off again. It was an update. It read, "Please remain in lockdown. A suspected armed intruder has entered the building. Police have been notified." I could feel my heart picking up speed. I didn't feel safe where I was. Suddenly, I heard running footsteps in the hall. They ran right up to the closet door and stopped. The doorknob turned and the door opened. What happened before I even had time to react? Standing outside was an older man in maybe his 50s. He was wearing a regular t-shirt with jeans. I'd never seen the man before. He asked if he could hide in here with me, and feeling bad for the guy, I said yes. There wasn't much room at all, but we both squeezed in. The man explained how he had been teaching a class down the hall when he heard the lockdown alarm. In my mind, this raised a red flag. Why then was he here instead of with his class? I asked him this, but he didn't immediately respond. Interrupting the silence was again the sound of my phone. It was another update from the school. The text said not to open our classroom doors for any reason, and that the suspect was believed to be an older man with a beard. I frantically reread the words on my screen. I didn't get the best look at this guy, but from what I did see, he fit that description distinctly. I felt my heart beating out of my chest. I made a split-second decision. I opened up the closet door and ran. I went straight to the nearest exit and out to my car in the parking lot. When I got there, I looked back behind me. I didn't see anything. I don't think the man followed me, or at least, he didn't follow me outside. From there, I got in my car and left.
I'd say around 25 minutes later, I received a final update text explaining that the police had cleared the building and the lockdown was over. I later learned a man had gotten inside by convincing the front desk that he was there to pick up his kid. Like that, a lockdown was called when they saw a gun holster around his waist as he was walking down the hall. Several teachers reported their classroom doors being forcefully struck during the lockdown from someone trying to open them. The man was gone when the police arrived, and they were never able to identify him. He was caught on the school's security cameras, but they never showed a full view of his face. However, they did show that he was indeed armed. I saw the videos myself, and I'm almost sure it was the same man hiding with me. It was also dark in that closet, so I can't be certain. There was once a kid at my school named Blake. Blake faced a lot of bullying from nearly everyone, both behind his back and directly to his face. It wasn't like he didn't bring some of it on himself. He was prone to violence and often got in trouble for yelling at teachers. It seemed like he had been indoctrinated with some extreme ideas that went against what we were taught in school. I suppose it wasn't entirely his fault, as it likely had something to do with how he was raised. Still, that didn't stop anyone from treating him poorly. Blake was as unpleasant in conversation as he was in appearance. He nearly got expelled once for harassing a girl after she rejected him, complaining that he smelled awful. If only he had been expelled then, things might have turned out differently. The turning point came one day in history class. Blake interrupted the lesson to argue with the teacher about something related to the Civil War, and it quickly escalated. The teacher shut him down pretty harshly, humiliating him in front of everyone. This triggered Blake to start shouting about how the country had been ruined, but instead of listening, the class just laughed at him. He stormed out of the room. That was on a Friday. Over the weekend, Blake started posting disturbing content on his Snapchat. He shared pictures of himself holding pieces from his dad's gun collection, something he often bragged about. He even posed in front of a Nazi flag, which I assume belonged to his dad as well. But the most terrifying post was a photo of our history teacher's face taped to a cardboard box with the caption, "Getting ready for school on Monday." These posts sent chills down my spine. People had joked for years that Blake might do something drastic one day, but no one ever believed he would actually go through with it. Several students reported the posts to the school, but in hindsight, they should have reported it to the police. None of us, including me, took it seriously enough. If I had, there's no way I would have gone to school that Monday without knowing he was being dealt with. From what I later heard, Blake arrived late that day, during 5th period, right when we had American history. He wasn't allowed into class as usual, and was confronted by the school resource officer and a couple of administrators who asked to search his backpack. That's when he pulled out a gun and shot the officer before running off. I heard the gunshot from the opposite side of the school, and moments later the lockdown alert went out. We all knew it had to be Blake. I looked over at my teacher, whose face had gone pale. All I could picture in my mind were the bullet holes in the printout of his face from Blake's Snapchat post. After a few seconds, the teacher regained his composure, locked the door, turned out the lights, and ordered us to hide out of sight. We knew Blake was coming for him, and by extension, all of us. I remember thinking about how those lockdown drills we used to complain about suddenly didn't seem so pointless anymore. Blake reached the classroom door within minutes, pounding on it and yelling, "I know you're in there. I'm not an idiot." Students started crying quietly into their shirts to muffle the sound, while others pulled out their phones to either text their families or live stream what was happening, assuming they wouldn't make it out alive. Even I started thinking that way. My mind was racing with fear. I couldn't focus on how to defend myself or escape. It all felt too unreal. All I could think about was that I might die sitting on the cold tile floor of my high school, cowering in the darkness among a group of students that would soon become a pile of bodies. Suddenly, we heard a gunshot. The room erupted into screams and panic set in. In that chaotic moment, I made a split-second decision to run to the window and attempt to jump from the 2nd story rather than wait for Blake to break in. Several students followed me, but I hesitated, fumbling around as someone pushed past me, sending me to the floor. That's when I looked back at the door. Blake was clutching his face, blood pouring between his fingers. The door handle was bent, as if he had been trying to break it. I just stared, trying to process what I was seeing. The teacher was yelling at us to get away from the windows and hide again. He called my name, trying to snap me out of my daze, and that's when I quietly muttered, "I think Blake shot himself." I said it so softly that I didn't expect anyone to hear me over the noise, but a few students did, and suddenly the room went quiet. A friend rushed to the door and peered out the window just as Blake was stumbling away. I finally stood up, and together we saw blood splattered on the floor outside. In the eerie silence, we could hear Blake's pained cries echoing down the hallway. Against every bit of common sense, I tried to open the door, but it was broken. It wasn't just locked, it was jammed. We were trapped inside, but at least Blake was gone. Hours later, we were finally freed and learned the full story. Blake had tried to shoot the lock off the door, but the bullet caused the handle to malfunction, sending metal fragments flying into his face. One piece lodged into his eye, ending his rampage. Blake was arrested and charged as an adult. He'll be in prison for at least the next 20 years. Fortunately, the resource officer he shot recovered without any lasting injuries. As for the rest of us, we were just lucky Blake's plan didn't go the way he had intended. It also proves one thing. Despite what movies show, you can't just shoot open a lock. My high school is located in an area with a lot of gang violence, so lockdowns were a relatively common occurrence. However, the one event that stands out in my mind wasn't related to any of that. The only time I truly felt scared wasn't due to a fugitive or a shooting. It was because of a student who everyone already knew was dangerous. His name was Jason. Jason was one of those kids who was insanely smart, but had serious issues with authority, focus, and socialization. I'm sure everyone knew at least one kid like that in school. He had been suspended once for bringing a knife to school, and then expelled later that same year for attempting to strangle a teacher with a shoelace. He came back the following year after spending several months at an intervention school, but unfortunately it seemed like he came back worse than when he left. I had the misfortune of being stuck in the front office with him once when we both got in trouble for different things at the same time. We ended up sitting there together, waiting for the assistant principal to talk to us individually. It must have been a hectic day because she was tied up with someone else. In just a few minutes, Jason started talking my ear off about the kids he met at the intervention school, pyromaniacs, drug dealers, and even gang members. They were clearly a bad influence on him, but honestly, I think he should have stayed there. It seemed like he fit in. He spoke highly of his experience and even said he made friends, which surprised me. At first, I was somewhat entertained by his stories about the trouble he got into with those kids. But then he casually mentioned something that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Jason told me that someone at the intervention school had taught him how to make a bomb. Before I could ask if he was serious, the assistant principal called him into her office. That was the last time, and really the only time, that I ever spoke to him. It was strange because, despite everything I'd heard about him, he seemed to be in a great mood, almost happy, even though he was in trouble again. At the time, I thought maybe he would get better, but now I realized the only thing that made him happy was remembering the violent criminals he hung out with and thinking of ways to hurt people. By the third week of school, I'm sure Jason was itching to get back to the other school, which is the only explanation I have for what he did next. Otherwise, it seemed completely unprovoked, unless he really did enjoy causing harm. One day, during second period, Jason called in a bomb threat. He was caught quickly but refused to reveal the bomb's location, so the entire school was evacuated. I remember vividly how my stomach dropped when I saw Jason's clear backpack sitting against the hallway wall as we were walking out. It was stuffed with a garbage bag, and I immediately suspected it was the bomb. I told one of the administrators who radioed it in. I felt incredibly lucky that it didn't go off while all those kids were packed together like sardines, walking out of the building. I was shaking as I made my way out to the football field, but at least I managed to find a seat in the bleachers instead of having to stand. We were out there for hours in the hot sun, locked down, waiting for the bomb squad to be called in to deal with the bag. The entire school had to be swept for other bombs. My fear gradually gave way to boredom, and eventually I became restless. I started messing around with the people sitting next to me, joking that I was suffering from heat stroke and needed to lie down. No one believed me or moved, so I lay across their feet as a joke. It was all in good fun. They were kicking me and laughing. But while I was down there, I saw something that froze me in place. Taped to the bottom of the seat in front of me was a box wrapped in duct tape with a note that read, "This is the real one." I panicked, pushing the kids' legs apart to get a better look. At first, they thought I was being weird, but when they saw the expression on my face, they realized something was wrong. One of them had been sitting right on top of what appeared to be a bomb. I freaked out and jumped from the bleachers, twisting my ankle in the process. This caused a massive panic as word of the danger spread and everyone tried to flee at once. With nowhere safe to go and 1,000 students running wild, the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Several freshmen were trampled, resulting in broken bones, and some kids even hopped fences and ran into the road or nearby shops. Many just took the opportunity to run all the way home. By the time the chaos settled, the school was nearly deserted. I'm sure Jason would have found it hilarious if he ever heard about it. What makes it even more embarrassing is the fact that none of the bombs were real. It was all fake. Jason was smart enough to have made real bombs and could have killed people, but he chose not to because his goal wasn't to end up in prison for years. He wanted to be sent to juvenile detention or another intervention school. All that fear, panic, and wasted time were just part of a sick joke he was playing. What haunts me is knowing that if he had decided to carry out his plan for real, a lot of people could have died, and I might have been one of them. No one was prepared for the threat he posed, and the school's response exposed a significant weakness. If those bombs had been real, the results would have been devastating. I don't know where Jason is now, but I hope he stays far away from me for the rest of my life. I live in Oklahoma, right in the middle of Tornado Alley. Extreme weather drills have been a frequent part of school life for decades, long before kids had to deal with all the other emergency drills. I went to middle school in the 90s, and I vividly remember huddling on the floor in the interior hallways of my school, lights off, with my butt sticking up in the air at least once a month for years. As a girl, I always felt uncomfortable, like I was exposing myself to all the teachers walking down the hall. But no matter what I said, I had to follow instructions. I came to dread the extreme weather lockdowns more than the idea of a deadly tornado itself. A tornado might strike once in a blue moon, but it felt like I had no choice but to moon the weirdest teachers every month. Even worse, the lockdowns happened more often than just once a month, because real extreme weather situations were very common during certain times of the year. One day in May, during my 7th grade year, such a situation occurred. At the time, my classroom was in one of the temporary buildings put up around the school to alleviate overcrowding. We all called them portables, but they weren't actually portable, just flimsy structures. The procedure for anyone in a portable during a weather emergency was to immediately evacuate and take shelter in the main building, leaving everything behind, including backpacks. We all sat on the ground, covering our heads with our hands, and remained in that uncomfortable, awkward position for much longer than usual. The teachers informed us that an extreme cyclonic thunderstorm, with a high probability of producing tornadoes, was heading straight for us. They told us we wouldn't be allowed to go back to class until it passed. All of that technical jargon was incomprehensible to me at the time, but they are words I've since learned to take seriously. Most of the time, those lockdowns felt ridiculous and overdone, but that day, as the howling winds grew louder and the haunting wail of the tornado sirens droned on, the light-hearted chatter stopped, and a real sense of dread settled over us. Initially, I felt a morbid curiosity mixed with excitement. I was a bit eager to experience a real storm without worrying about my home being destroyed. I didn't care if the school got wrecked as long as I didn't get hurt. But a part of me actually hoped a tornado would hit, making the embarrassment of the drills worth it. That hope didn't last long. Though the lights were off, natural light still came in from outside. But within minutes, the storm blocked out the sun, and it felt like an unnatural night had descended. The winds grew stronger, rattling the doors as though the storm itself was trying to get in. Then the hail came, smacking the doors like a barrage of meteors. What had been a quiet hallway was now filled with an overwhelming cacophony of noise. Fear gripped everyone. It was palpable. That's when we heard the telltale sound, the low rumble of rushing wind, like a freight train growing louder by the second. We all knew the tornado was close. It was undeniable by then, even though we couldn't see it. With every passing moment, it felt more likely that the tornado would hit us directly. A lot of kids started crying, and the teachers tried to calm us, but their own fear was evident in their voices. When the walls began to shake, the teachers finally took cover too. For a few minutes, we were all equalized in this vulnerable position, no longer worrying about anyone peeping, because we had bigger concerns. The air vibrated with the frequency of the tornado. I could feel it in my chest. Outside, I heard debris slamming against the doors, only to fly off again in an instant, like the world was being shredded by a wood chipper. The most terrifying moment came when the windows gave in, shattering as a torrent of air rushed into the hallway. The storm had finally found its way inside, and there was no escaping it. It felt like the entire school was about to be ripped off its foundation, with us thrown into the sky along with it. I clenched my teeth and prayed. I'm sure we all did. Miraculously, our prayers worked. Just when it felt like the tornado was going to crush us, the sound started to die down. Over the next few minutes, the signs of danger began to fade. Eventually, the sun returned and the air was still again. After waiting several more minutes to be sure, the lockdown was lifted and we were allowed to stand up. My legs and back were sore, but I was unharmed. The school was mostly intact, though there was some damage to the main building. However, when I stepped outside to where the portables had been, I saw the true devastation. The portables were completely gone, with only a few bits of rubble and some pipes sticking out of the ground. Everything I had in my bag, my scrapbook, notebooks, diary, was gone, swept away with no hope of being recovered. Realizing that if I had stayed in that classroom during the tornado, I would have been destroyed along with it, left a feeling in my chest I'll never forget. It's hard to describe what it's like to come so close to death at such a young age. Ever since that day, I've never taken the threat of severe weather lightly. It's a part of life here in Tornado Alley, but I was born and raised in Oklahoma, and it's where I'll stay.
This happened back in my freshman year of high school. It was an average school day, just like any other for the most part. I remember I was sitting in my history class, which I think was the third period of the day. That's when somebody came to the door of the classroom with a note. I remember that at my high school, a couple of students would work for the office each hour and deliver passes to the students. The passes would usually be for things like dentist appointments or whatever. When the student got to art class, she handed the note to my teacher, Mr. Watterson. He read the note and then called my name. I was really surprised because I wasn't aware of having any reason to leave the school that day. I thought maybe I had forgotten about a dentist appointment or something. But my mother hadn't mentioned anything, and I knew she would have. When my name was called, I looked around and then got up and slowly walked to my teacher. He said something like, "See you later, pal. Here's the homework." Then he grabbed the assignment from his desk and handed it to me. I took the note, which also served as a hall pass, and left the classroom. I remember that's when I read the pass for the first time. The note said something like, "I will be here to pick you up for your appointment at 10:30. Mom?" I guess I had an appointment of some sort, but it still seemed a little strange to me. I was happy to be leaving school. I walked through the empty hallways, making my way to the side entrance. There was a parking lot there, which is where people would get picked up by their parents. I got to the doors and went outside into the parking lot. There, I saw a minivan, but it wasn't my mother's van. It was a different model and color. I figured it was somebody else's parent, and my mother wasn't there yet. The time was not quite 10:30, but I think it was like 10:28 or something. I don't remember exactly. I stood there looking around, waiting for my mother to arrive. Then I saw the minivan that was sitting there with the engine running. The front passenger's windows started to roll down. I looked and saw a woman turn her head and look at me. We made eye contact, and I could tell that she was going to say something. Then she did. The woman said that she was there to pick me up and that my mother had asked her to. She then said that she was a friend of my mother. I had never seen this woman before in my life. Though I may not have been the brightest kid in the world, I sure wasn't that stupid. I was extremely skeptical. I asked the woman how she knew my mother exactly, and the woman replied, saying something like, "We're just old friends." I then told the woman that I didn't feel comfortable going with her and that I was going to wait for my mother. The woman tried to get me to just go into the van. I then turned around to head back into the school. This situation was starting to feel really sketchy. The problem was, when I got back to the side doors of the school, they wouldn't open. The doors were locked. I had forgotten that all doors to the school were locked during the school day, besides the front main entrance. Then things got worse. I looked back to the van to see a side sliding door start to open up. I wasn't aware that anybody else had been inside of it. A man emerged and started walking toward me. The van was maybe 50 feet away at this point. As I stood right outside the side doors of the school, I felt like my only option was to run away. I turned and ran around to the front side of the school. I didn't bother to look back at all to see if I would be chased. Back then, I could run pretty fast, and luckily, I made it around to the front end of the school pretty quickly. I kept running until I got to the front doors, and then walked inside. When you first got inside the front doors of the school, there was a little window where a woman sat during the school day. She would ask you who you were, and you had to show her your student ID or whatever. She asked me for my ID, and as I got it out, I tried to tell her about what had just happened. I must not have explained it very well though, because she seemed pretty confused. To be honest, the whole situation was pretty confusing. I got a hall pass from my mother to leave school for an appointment that I didn't know what it was. Then my mother wasn't there, but another woman was and asked me to go with her. Then a grown man popped out of the side of the van. Believe me, I was just as confused as she was. After confirming my school ID, the woman at the window wrote me a pass to go back to my history class, and I was on my way. I walked through the empty hallways of the school back to class, just about 15 minutes after I had originally left. I walked back in. My teacher was speaking, and there was a video paused on the board. I remember it was super awkward walking into the middle of class. Everybody was staring at me. They, as well as the teacher, were probably all really confused to see me return so soon after I had left. Back so soon? Mr. Watterson said. I just said, yeah. There was confusion, and I didn't have to leave. I then sat back down at my desk, and the lesson continued. Class only went on for about another 10 minutes after that, and then we were let out. My next period was English. This class was always pretty boring to me for some reason, but it was also fairly easy. I had Miss Gallo as my teacher, who was very nice. I got to class, and the day started like any other. But during this class, probably 20 minutes in, Miss Gallo got a phone call at her desk. She paused the lesson, answered it, and then hung up the phone. She told us that we were going into a lockdown and made it clear that this was not a drill. She seemed fairly concerned, and we all had to leave our desks and sit on the ground in the back of the classroom. We had no idea what it was about, and I truly had no clue either. I wasn't able to connect the dots for some reason. The lockdown went on for a good 30 minutes. Everybody was really quiet, and most people didn't say anything. Eventually, there was another phone call. Miss Gallo went over and answered it, then returned to inform us that the lockdown had been lifted. We were all relieved, and we finished up class, which didn't last too much longer. There was still another hour of school left at that point. By the time the school day was over, though, the word had spread, and I had found out what the lockdown was for. A man had walked into the school and completely surpassed the woman at the window asking for credentials. She asked him to stop, but he just blew past her without saying a word and walked into the school. He then disappeared into the hallways, and she had to call the office, which made the decision to lock down the school until the individual was found and identified. Unfortunately, he hid, and it took about 30 minutes to find him. The police had to be called. They found him hiding in the bathrooms that were right by my locker. The craziest part was that it was the same man who had come out of the minivan that had tried to pick me up. This story remains one of the craziest things to ever happen to me. The woman and the man must have somehow created the note for me and tried to get me to leave the school. Who they were and how they found me, I truly have no idea. It really freaks me out to think about that part. Luckily, nothing like that happened again. Alone in the house, I hid by the window, peeking through the curtains. The car outside wouldn't leave, and it freaked me out. Trying to distract myself, I turned on the TV and put on a sitcom, but my eyes kept darting back to the creepy car outside. It just wouldn't leave. I decided that I wasn't going to look outside anymore. It wasn't doing me any good. Maybe 10 minutes passed, and I was just watching TV when I heard a door closing outside. It was a car door. I quickly looked back out the window again and saw a man getting out of the vehicle. He was wearing a red sweatshirt. I watched him walk right into our front yard. I ducked down and then ran away, sprinting from my bedroom. I got inside, closed my door, and hid under my bed like a little kid. I was terrified. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what to do. A few moments went by, and then I heard another sound. It was a knocking at my bedroom window that nearly made me jump. Immediately, I took out my phone and dialed 911. Whoever was there was definitely up to no good. I told the operator exactly what was going on, and I was told that the police would be there shortly. In the meantime, I wasn't hearing any noises, and the man had knocked on my window just the one time. Still scared, I remained hidden under my bed. I hoped that the man had gone away, but just as I was thinking that, I heard a sound of glass breaking coming from the other end of the house in the back. The guy had broken in. I heard more noise from that direction, and soon it sounded like somebody was inside. Then I heard another noise. Police sirens. This was the best sound I had heard all day. I heard the man inside the house turning around and leaving through the back the way he had come. Less than a minute later, the police arrived. Long story short, they actually caught the guy running away in the neighbor's backyard. The same man was also the cause of the lockdown at my school earlier. Apparently, he had somehow gotten inside the school, probably before it started for the day. Someone spotted him inside, and the school went under lockdown. I don't know how, but he was able to evade everybody and leave the school without getting caught, likely escaping out of an open window. I still can't believe how he ended up at my house of all places. It makes me think that possibly the guy was stalking me. Either way, I'm glad I don't have to worry about it anymore. This class was always pretty boring to me for some reason, but it was also fairly easy. I had Miss Gallo as my teacher, who was very nice. I got to class, and the day started like any other. But during this class, probably 20 minutes in, Miss Gallo got a phone call at her desk. She paused the lesson, answered it, and then hung up the phone. She told us that we were going into a lockdown and made it clear that this was not a drill. She seemed fairly concerned, and we all had to leave our desks and sit on the ground in the back of the classroom. We had no idea what it was about, and I truly had no clue either. I wasn't able to connect the dots for some reason. The lockdown went on for a good 30 minutes. Everybody was really quiet, and most people didn't say anything. Eventually, there was another phone call. Miss Gallo went over and answered it, then returned to inform us that the lockdown had been lifted. We were all relieved, and we finished up class, which didn't last too much longer. There was still another hour of school left at that point. By the time the school day was over, though, the word had spread, and I had found out what the lockdown was for. A man had walked into the school and completely surpassed the woman at the window asking for credentials. She asked him to stop, but he just blew past her without saying a word and walked into the school. He then disappeared into the hallways, and she had to call the office, which made the decision to lock down the school until the individual was found and identified. Unfortunately, he hid, and it took about 30 minutes to find him. The police had to be called. They found him hiding in the bathrooms that were right by my locker. The craziest part was that it was the same man who had come out of the minivan that had tried to pick me up. This story remains one of the craziest things to ever happen to me. The woman and the man must have somehow created the note for me and tried to get me to leave the school. Who they were and how they found me, I truly have no idea. It really freaks me out to think about that part. Luckily, nothing like that happened again. This story happened when I had to go to Saturday school. I guess that Saturday school was sort of like detention. I was in high school, and I think I was a junior. The way I got detention was that I forgot to return several of my school books. We were given books from the library that we needed for certain classes. When the semester was almost over, we were supposed to return the books on our own. However, I forgot, and I actually lost one of the books in my house. Eventually, I found it and returned all my overdue books, but I still had to go to Saturday school. It really wasn't that bad and was pretty much just like study hall. It was just one classroom, which was one of the language arts classrooms. The teacher just sat at his desk and made sure that we all behaved. Occasionally, he let us know what time it was and could answer some questions or help us with problems if he could. I remember that the teacher was Mr. Sanders. He was a nice guy and overall pretty reasonable. I remember that my mom dropped me off at the school just before 8 a.m. on Saturday morning. Saturday school started at 8 and went until 12, but not everyone had to be there the whole time. I only had to be there for 2 hours, so I would get to leave by 10. I know that depending on what some of the kids did to get Saturday school, they might have to write papers or something like that. Other kids just had to work on their own individual homework or study. I had to write a short paper on what I learned from not returning my books on time. I also brought a little bit of homework to do for another class. When I got there, there were only 4 other students. I recognized 2 of them, and the other 2 I didn't. They were not in my grade. The ones I recognized were both pretty much troublemakers. Kids who would skip class a lot or not turn stuff in. I felt sort of out of place because I was normally a really good student. At 8 a.m., Mr. Sanders shut the door and spoke to us for a few moments, then went behind his desk to work on his computer. I got to work and wrote the paper. It didn't take that long at all. Then I started doing my homework and finished that too by the time it was 9:30 a.m. Then I got a book from Mr. Sanders' bookshelf in the back and started reading. I remember that it was a short time after I started reading that Mr. Sanders got up from his desk and said he was going to the bathroom. He jokingly asked us all if we were going to be okay while he was gone. Then he left. A minute later, one of the other kids in the classroom got up and left as well. I wasn't quite sure what he was doing, but I didn't think too much of it. I just kept reading. But like 5 minutes later, the school intercom said that we were going under a lockdown. This seemed really strange. We all had no idea why we would be in a lockdown. There was hardly anybody at the school. It was a Saturday. Only one of the doors was even unlocked for people to come in on Saturdays. Most of us knew from lockdown drills that the classroom doors were supposed to be closed, locked, and the lights turned off. Then we were supposed to sit on the ground in the back of the classroom. The problem was that our teacher was gone. We looked around at each other, unsure of what to do. Then someone spoke up and said, "Shall we close the door?" We decided that we would. I walked over, closed it, and then locked the door. Someone else turned out the lights. We all started talking to each other, wondering what exactly was going on. If our teacher came back, we would let him in, but he most likely had keys with him. We weren't hearing anything from the hallways, but whatever the problem was could have been from anywhere in the school. A few minutes went by and nothing happened. Then somebody tried opening the door, thinking it might be the teacher. I got up and walked over to it, but by the time I got there and looked out, nobody was there. I went back and sat down at my desk again. We were really confused in the classroom now. Less than a minute later, it sounded like we heard some shouting in the distance. Then someone tried opening our classroom door, followed by more knocking on it. I walked over once again and this time looked out the small window. It was the kid who had been in our class earlier, but left. He was yelling and asking to be let in. I was just about to open the door for him when I heard more shouting coming from down the hallway. I heard somebody say, "Police," and the kid ran away from the door down the hallway. For several minutes, we were as confused as ever, but the lockdown ended about 5 minutes later, and several police officers knocked on our door. We let them in, and they explained the situation to us. When our teacher, Mr. Sanders, had left to use the bathroom, the other student left the classroom to follow him. The student knocked the teacher unconscious by punching him from behind. A janitor heard the incident, and then the student ran, which sent the school into lockdown, and the police were called. I'm glad that I didn't let that student back into the classroom. Mr. Sanders ended up being okay, but he had to go to the hospital with a minor concussion. I'm not sure what that kid's problem with Mr. Sanders was exactly, but I did hear that he had been suspended earlier in the year for fighting. That was the only time I went to Saturday school. Back when I was in high school during my freshman and sophomore years, I would ride the bus. It picked me up at the corner of my street early in the morning and dropped me off afterwards. I went to an average-sized high school about 10 minutes away from where I lived. At least the place seemed average to me. There were probably about 700 or 800 kids combined in all 4 grades. This is something that happened during my sophomore year. It was a school day just like any other up to that point. One class had just ended, and I was going to my final class for the day. As I stood in the hallway near my locker, I talked with some of my friends. I had a decent friend group of several other guys. The locker commons were always really crowded between classes, and I remember that the first warning bell rang, meaning that you had 2 minutes to make it to class. Kids started leaving the commons, but a couple of friends and I stayed. My classroom wasn't really that far off. I remember that one of the guys there was a grade ahead of us. His name was Jake. His brother was Tommy, and Tommy was in my friend group, so I think that's why he was there. As I was about to head to class, I heard another sound come over the school speakers. At first I thought, how could the bell ring again so soon? But it wasn't really the same bell sound for when class starts. It was followed by an announcement over the intercom. We were told that the school was going into a lockdown. All of us should go to our next hour classes immediately, and the teachers should lock the doors and turn off the lights. There were still quite a few kids around, including my 4 friends. I heard one of them say they were going to just leave. Nobody wanted to sit in the classroom for who knows how long during the lockdown. One of the school exit doors was not that far away, and I saw about 10 kids running for the doors and going outside, with more following. There was only 1 class period left for the day, so I decided that I wanted to leave as well. But I didn't drive there. That's when Jake asked me if I wanted to leave. He said he would give a ride home to anybody that wanted to, because he was leaving. As he said this, he started to walk away. Half of my friend group was leaving, and the other half was actually going to their classes. Other kids were also leaving, and chaos ensued. We had to leave fast if we were going to. I saw one of the teachers enter the hallway and start telling kids to get to their classes. There were fewer and fewer kids around by the second. I decided to leave, but by that point, Jake and my other friends had already left. I remember the teacher yelling at the kids to stop leaving. There were probably about 50 kids that ended up making it out of the school, and I was one of them. When I got outside, my friends and I did not do a good job sticking together. Kids were literally running away to leave. They were going to the parking lots where students parked mostly, and some ran off through the grass toward a nearby neighborhood. The school was in an area that was mostly residential, but there were a few businesses down the road. There were woods and all of the sports fields behind the school. The student parking lots were on the side, with one behind the tennis courts. When I got outside, I couldn't even see Jake or my friends anymore. It was chaos. Kids were running everywhere. A teacher took a step out of the school and told us all to come back inside, but nobody listened to him. I figured that Jake and my friends would be in the parking lot, so I ran in that direction. I had to kind of go around the school to get there, though I wasn't sure which parking lot Jake parked in. So I went to the main one first. When I got there, he was nowhere in sight. I realized that he must be in the other one and hoped that I wasn't too late. By now, most kids had made it to their cars if they were leaving. I sprinted for the other parking lot, but it was a ways away. When I got there, there was nobody. A lot of cars were still there, but I didn't see any students at all. I walked around, hoping that maybe my friends were in their car but hadn't left yet. Unfortunately, though, I didn't see them. I realized that they must have left without me. Now, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back to the school because it was probably locked, and I wasn't supposed to leave in the first place. But I also couldn't go home because it was too far to walk, and I didn't have a car. I started walking back up closer to the school, not really knowing exactly what I was going to do. I got to a back door of the school and tried going inside, but it was locked, just like I figured it would be. After this, I was going to go back around to the parking lot and then walk down the sidewalk. But when I turned, I saw some guy coming out of the school. I just knew that this guy had to be the reason for the lockdown. He was looking over his shoulder, was way too old to be a student and definitely not a teacher. I was a long way away from him, and I quickly ran behind a nearby tree, hoping that he didn't see me. For a few seconds, I didn't bother to look and see where the guy was. I expected him to walk in another direction, but as I was still behind the tree, I heard him walking closer. I ran from behind the tree to the woods, which was maybe 20 feet away. There was no question that the guy saw me running into the woods. I hoped that he wouldn't follow me. I got inside, went about 20 feet deep into it, and then ducked down and hid. I had no clue why the school had been locked down. Up until that point, I had been more concerned about leaving with my friends. After seeing a suspicious guy leave the school, though, I realized that I might be in actual danger. For a few seconds, I didn't hear anything until I heard footsteps in the grass right outside the woods that I was in. I couldn't take it any longer and got up and started running. I ran through the woods and then to the left. I didn't hear the guy enter the woods or anything, but I just wanted to get out of there. After about 2 or 3 minutes of running, I reached the edge of the woods, kind of near the street. I walked through the grass to the sidewalk and then ran down it. I kept going until I eventually reached a gas station. When I got there, I asked the employee working if I could borrow his cell phone to call my mom. I told him how my school had been locked down and everything. He let me use it, and I was able to wait there until my mom came and picked me up. Luckily, she worked not too far away from the school and our house, and I was able to leave work without a problem. I didn't get in trouble for leaving school early either. The lockdown ended up lasting for the entire class period. In fact, students were kept there almost 10 minutes after the regularly scheduled time that school got out, so I didn't miss any class or anything. The man that I saw had entered the school trying to pick up his daughter. It was a situation where he was divorced and hadn't seen his daughter in a long time and didn't have custody of her. He was also drunk and threatened a custodian when asked to leave. I'm not sure why he came over to me when I was in the woods, though. It was a really scary situation for me. This story takes place years ago when I was in high school. It happened after lunch period. The way my school worked was that we would have class, then lunch, then study hall. Class was an hour long, and lunch and study hall were about 25 minutes each. Your study hall classroom would be the same one you had directly before lunch, but for me I had gym class that period. It was 10th grade PE, and the class was very easy and enjoyable for me. When we had study hall, though, we had to use a different teacher's classroom who had a prep hour at that time. A couple of times we were unable to get the classroom and had to spend study hall in the gym, which was kind of weird. If that happened, we would sit in the bleachers or on the gym floor and do homework. Usually the teacher would let us know before we went to lunch where it would be, and most of the time, we had a certain classroom. So on this school day after lunch, I started heading back to the classroom. It was a decent ways away from the lunchroom, on the other side of the school. I talked with some of my friends that I sat with at lunch for a while. My gym teacher was not very strict at all, especially with study hall. He didn't mind students coming back a minute or two late. The lunchroom cleared out, and I began walking back to class. The bell rang when I was still about a minute away. By then, the hallways were empty, besides me walking through them. Soon, I got to the classroom, but the door was closed, which was odd. When I tried opening it, I couldn't. The door was locked. I also noticed that inside, the lights appeared to be off. I turned and walked away, realizing that we must be meeting in the gym today. I hadn't known, though. I remember thinking to myself, I don't remember being told that we were meeting in the gym. How did everybody else know besides me? I headed back towards the gym, and then I heard an announcement come over the school speakers. It said, "This is a lockdown, and this is not a drill. Please remain in your classrooms, and no students are to be out in the halls." I was about halfway back to the gym at that point. It still hadn't registered to me that the classroom had been locked down. I hurried up and made my way to the gym. When I got there, the doors were closed and locked. It was in that moment that I realized they were meeting in the classroom. I know I was a little slow on that, but I headed back to the classroom now, walking as fast as I could without running. I hadn't heard or seen anybody else in the hallways at all. It was completely quiet until suddenly I heard the sound of something hitting a locker around the corner. It was like somebody punched a locker or threw something against it. The sound was very loud, especially breaking the dead silence. I stopped in my tracks and no longer wanted to keep going to my classroom. I started walking in the other direction. In that moment, I heard footsteps coming from where I had heard the loud noise. My heart started racing. I kept walking and heard the footsteps continue. They were about to come around the corner. I saw a staircase on the left and darted over, quickly going down the stairs. After getting down, I ran about 30 feet down the hallway to the first classroom that I saw. When I was there, I desperately started banging on the door. I didn't know what class this was, but I was hoping that they would let me in. After knocking a couple of times, I tried the door, but of course, it was locked. The teacher was not answering. I hoped that there was actually a class going on in there. As I waited, I heard whoever had been behind me now walking down the stairs rather quickly. I looked back and saw their legs appearing, but couldn't tell who it was yet. I didn't want to know. I turned back and kept banging on the door. Then I heard the person behind me reach the bottom of the stairs and start walking towards me. All of a sudden, the classroom door finally opened. The teacher let me in and quickly shut the door. Once I was in the classroom, all of the lights were off, but I saw the students in the back of the room on the floor. The teacher quickly locked the door, and then somebody actually tried opening it just a few seconds later. It must have been whoever had been following me. They banged on the door a couple of times. The teacher looked out the little window, and then turned back and walked away. Some students started talking quietly. One of them asked me where I had come from. The teacher stopped everyone and said for us all to be quiet. I remember things got really silent for a while. Then she went back over to the door and looked out again. I think by then the guy was gone. We remained locked down, though, for what felt like a really long time. I think it was almost an hour. Finally, the lockdown was lifted. I remember that I got called to the principal's office and had to answer some questions about what happened. They didn't really tell me much about the situation, though. That was definitely the scariest moment of my time in high school. I don't know what would have happened if that person caught up with me. I don't want to know either. Back in high school during my junior year, I used to get to school about 15 minutes before it started. That was the time the bus would drop us off. After getting inside, I would head upstairs to my locker first. There was a spot upstairs near the stairs that had a large window at the end of the hall. It wasn't far from my locker, and you could sit on the ledge in front of the window. My friends and I would sit there almost every day and talk. It was kind of a routine or a before-school hangout spot for us. The window overlooked part of the parking lot and the softball field next to the school on the east side. We could also see the sun rising, which lit up the inside really well. One day, I arrived at school, went upstairs to my locker, and then over to my friends by the window. There were about 5 of us, and we chatted until the warning bell sounded. When it did, we all started to disperse to our classes. The hallways had been crowded, but things were quickly becoming quieter. I looked out the window and saw a few kids hurrying in at the last minute to make it to class. Then, I noticed one guy hurrying into the school. He was too old to be a student, and I didn't recognize him as a teacher. At first I thought maybe he was a substitute, but he wasn't dressed for it. He was wearing an old, baggy sweatshirt and sweatpants. He entered the school on the floor below, and I then headed to my class. As I walked through the hallways toward the other end, I noticed that the same guy was now coming up the stairs to the top floor. I went into my classroom at that point. Class went on as usual, as did my next few classes. Then came the lunch period. While sitting with a couple of my friends, I saw the guy again. He briefly walked into the lunchroom and then left through another exit. I was surprised to see him again and thought it was strange that I even noticed him. The school I went to was pretty large, with lots of students, so it would have been easy to blend into the crowd. Later in the day, during my last class, we were about halfway through when the phone in the classroom rang. Our teacher answered it and then told us that the school was being locked down. We were instructed to move to the back of the classroom. The teacher locked the doors and turned off the lights. We were all really confused. I didn't even think about the guy I had seen earlier. Like everyone else, I had no idea what was happening. We all started talking to each other, wondering what was going on, but nobody knew. The teacher wouldn't tell us either, just telling us to stay calm and quiet. About an hour later, the lockdown was lifted, but we still didn't know what had happened. School was let out, and we all went home. When I got home, my mom asked me about the lockdown. I guess she had heard more about it than I had. I found out that the man I had seen multiple times was the reason for the lockdown. During the last class period, he had been seen suspiciously walking down a hallway, which led to the lockdown and the police being called. Unfortunately, the man was able to escape through an open window. Nobody knew who he was. I told my mom that I had seen the guy enter the school and had spotted him several times throughout the day. It blew my mind that he had managed to fly under the radar for so long. He had been there since the start of the school day, but it wasn't until the last hour that anyone seemed to notice him. I'm just glad that the guy didn't cause any harm. I don't know who he was or what he was doing there. This story is from 2017, when I was a freshman in high school. One day, during my third period, I was bored in class. I was happy because I had an orthodontics appointment later, which meant I would be getting out of class. My mom would be coming to the school to pick me up. The class I was in was math, which honestly was quite boring to me. I was never really into math in high school. Usually I'd just sit and look out the window, not paying much attention. I sat in the back corner of the classroom, which was on the second floor of the school. That's what I was doing that day, just looking out the window. The teacher was talking about math, but I was distracted by the view of the front parking lot below. I was hoping the time would pass quickly so I could leave, and my mom would arrive soon. As I was looking out, I noticed several police cars driving down the street. They turned into the front school parking lot, which I found a bit strange. Before I could think more about it, the classroom door opened. It was a student with a pass, and I knew it was for me. The teacher paused, took the pass, and called my name. I packed my things, took the pass, and my teacher gave me the homework assignment for the day, which I stuffed into my backpack before heading out. As I walked down the hallway, I got a text from my mom saying she was waiting at the side door. That was where students would usually get picked up, but it was on the opposite end of the school. As I walked through the empty hallways, suddenly I heard a sound come over the school intercom. I wondered what it could be. Immediately, I had a bad feeling, as this was out of the ordinary. The message announced that the school was going into lockdown. I was still a ways away from the side door, but really wanted to get there before the lockdown took effect. I didn't want to stay in a classroom and miss my orthodontics appointment. It wasn't the appointment that really mattered. It was that if I went, my mom would let me take the rest of the day off from school. Plus, I was a little worried about why the school was going under lockdown. If there was any danger, I wanted to get out fast. I quickened my pace, walking down the halls. I hadn't seen anyone since leaving my classroom and hoped I wouldn't. If a teacher saw me, they'd likely make me stay in their classroom. When I was about halfway to the side doors but still upstairs, I heard footsteps from an upcoming hallway. I didn't have to go down that hallway, but it intersected with the one I was in. Not knowing who it was, I decided to avoid them. I stopped a few feet back and hid behind some lockers. The footsteps got closer, so I decided to turn around and head in the opposite direction. As I started walking, the footsteps behind me suddenly sped up. I almost ran to the nearest corner and rounded it, hoping whoever it was wouldn't follow, but they did. I could hear them getting closer. I ran for the stairs and went down them. I thought there was no way they'd follow me downstairs, but they did. Whoever it was had to be following me. I assumed it was probably a teacher, but I wasn't sure. I had gone too far at this point, and it was clear I was trying to get away. I turned at the first chance I got and went down a long, straight hallway. The only sounds were my footsteps and those behind me. I sprinted to the end of the hallway. When I finally got there, I had one more corner to turn before reaching the side exit. Before I rounded the corner, I looked back and saw a man with long, stringy black hair, wearing a black leather jacket. I had no idea who he was, but he was definitely not a teacher. When I saw him, I was creeped out. I turned and sprinted away as fast as I could. I ran all the way to the side doors and burst through them, running to my mom's car. I made it inside and told her we were in lockdown and that some guy had been following me around the school. She called the school to report it. As we left, we saw several police cars parked out front. Then I remembered seeing them earlier. Later that day, I learned more details. The guy inside the school had been fleeing from the police. They had tried to pull him over earlier, but he led them on a short chase. After his car got stuck in a ditch, he fled on foot. He managed to get away from the police for a bit before being spotted on the school campus. Nobody thought he had actually gotten inside, and the police were mainly searching behind the school. Eventually, though, an officer inside the building found him in a hallway. Luckily, no one was harmed, but I don't think anyone knew he had been following me. I'm so glad I got away from him. I don't know if he was dangerous, but it was definitely the scariest experience I had in high school. I'm currently a high school history teacher. This is something that happened a few years ago. It was a normal school day. I had just finished teaching a class, and it was going into the third period of the day. During this hour, I did not have a class. Each teacher in the department would get an hour where they didn't have a class. It was different for most teachers, though. Usually I would use this hour to grade assignments and prepare lessons. So on this day, when class ended and the next period started, I left my classroom. I was going to the teacher's lounge to make some coffee, and then I would go back to my classroom. Each department had a teacher's lounge. The history department at the school had 5 of us. When I got to the room, it was empty. It was just a little ways down the hall and was between one hallway and another. It was sort of a weird room because it had 2 windows that looked out into the hallways. We had curtains inside, though, that were always closed so nobody could see in. I'm not really sure why there were windows in the room in the first place, but nevertheless, inside the lounge were a few couches, a table, some chairs, a fridge, and a TV. It was basically a break room. The floors were carpeted, and it was comfortable in there. I took my time making coffee because I didn't really have that much work to do. As I was in there, though, I heard over the school speakers that there was a lockdown. I was really surprised at first. In all my time being a teacher up to that point, I had never seen a real lockdown. We had several drills, but never a real one. I was wondering what the reason was, as it had seemed like a very normal school day. I decided to go to the doorway and open it up. If there were any students in the hallway, I would make sure they got to a classroom. When I looked out into the hallway, I saw no one. It was very quiet. Then I went back into the lounge, got my coffee, and was going to head back to my classroom. But when I got to the doorway to leave, I looked out into the hallway and actually saw someone. It wasn't a student, though, or another teacher. It was a man who was younger looking, but way too old to be a high school student, probably mid to late 20s. He was walking in my direction. I decided to go back inside the teacher's lounge. My instincts were telling me that he wasn't supposed to be here. After I got inside, I locked the door to the lounge. Seconds later, somebody tried opening it. Obviously, it was the guy I had seen. I was really surprised that he tried going inside this room. Why would he want to go in the teacher's lounge? The guy then knocked on the door. I wasn't sure whether to answer it or not. For a moment, I was going to, but then I heard him say, from the other side, "Let me in." The way he said it was demanding, and it made me not want to let him in. I didn't answer and instead got my phone out to call the principal. I wanted to ask why we were in a lockdown and who this guy was. The guy knew I was in here, so I called out, asking him who he was. He didn't answer me and just asked to be let in again. When I called the principal, he didn't pick up the phone. He was probably busy. I waited for a minute or so, and then called again. Meanwhile, the guy who had tried to enter the lounge hadn't knocked or said anything in a while. So I thought that maybe he had left. At least, that's what I was hoping. I tried calling the principal again, but as I was dialing, suddenly I heard the sound of shattering glass. I looked over and saw that one of the windows in the break room was being broken. Some type of blunt object was crashing against it. The curtains were still closed, so I couldn't see very well to the other side. Soon, the entire window was smashed. I stood there, kind of in shock. Then I saw the man from the hallway. He suddenly started to climb through the window and enter the room. As he was doing that, I sprinted for the door. When I got to it, I ran out and kept running until I made it back to my classroom. When I got there, I unlocked the door, went inside, and locked the door behind me, all without looking back. Luckily for me, I didn't see the guy. I finally felt safe now that I was in my classroom, but the guy was still inside the school. I called the police, and they told me they were aware of the lockdown situation at the school. Some officers were already on their way. After that, I didn't hear or see anything else. I waited inside my classroom. The lockdown finally ended about 15 or 20 minutes later. The guy was caught by the police when they found him still inside the teacher's lounge. He had snuck into the school somehow and was on drugs. Aside from that, I don't know much else. I'm not sure what his actual intentions were, but I'm really glad I got away from him.